She held her 5-year-old daughter by the left hand and her 3-year-old son by the right. Tucked inside her coat pocket were the inheritance documents the lawyer had just handed her. Jogging through the garden of their apartment complex, she kept thinking, $24 million, plus the skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan. Finally, she could give her children a future where no one would ever look down on them. The moment she pushed open the front door, her husband and his secretary were standing in the foyer, holding a stack of divorce papers. The woman's red lips curled into a cold sneer. "Pack your bags. This house has no room for parasites." I stood in the doorway, still holding my children's soft little hands, my fingertips red from the garden wind. An early winter draft rushed in from behind me, carrying the smell of someone's braised pork ribs from down the hall, lifting the hem of my coat. The foyer light was blindingly bright. I'd installed that light myself 3 years ago, balancing on a stepladder. The bulb was warm yellow. Zhao Jin said it was too dim, not grand enough. I said warm yellow made it feel like home. He scoffed and never mentioned it again, and he never got around to changing it. Now he stood beneath that same light, wearing the dark blue suit I had just pressed for him last month. The cuff button was sewn by me, the left one a little tighter than the right because his left wrist bone is slightly thicker than his right, details only a wife who had ironed his shirts for 7 years would know. The woman beside him was also wearing blue. A royal blue trench coat, belt cinched immaculately, red-soled stilettos planted on my foyer floor as if she owned the place. Her name was Su Wanqing, Zhao Jin's executive secretary. 25 years old, 5 years younger than me, 30 pounds lighter, with an overseas degree I didn't have, and 2 fewer sets of pregnancy stretch marks. At that moment, she held a stack of A4 papers in her hand, the corners fluttering in the draft and revealing dense printed text within. "Divorce papers. Pack your bags." Su Wanqing pushed the stack toward me, her red lips curving like a poison blade. "This house can't accommodate parasites. Zhao Jin has supported you for 7 years. That's more than generous." Her voice was neither too loud nor too soft, just loud enough for the neighbor's window to crack open and a head to poke halfway out. I felt my daughter's fingers trembling in my right hand. A 5-year-old girl already understood what parasite meant. Just last week, the kindergarten teacher had explained that parasites are bad bugs that live on other creatures and steal their nutrients. "Mommy's not a bug." My daughter tilted her head up at me, tears welling in her eyes, but stubbornly refusing to fall. Her chin lifted high, that defiant look exactly like mine when I was little. I gave her hand a gentle squeeze, then let go. I bent down, lifted both their little backpacks off my shoulders, and handed them to my daughter. "Take your brother to the sofa in the living room. Change your shoes. There are little cakes for you in the fridge. Eat them first. Mommy will be right in." I rubbed my son's head. He was only 3, still oblivious to what was unfolding, only noticing his sister's red eyes, his own mouth pouting in imitation. My daughter hesitated, looked at me, then at the 2 figures by the door. Finally, she took her brother's hand and walked through the foyer without looking back. Her stride was steady, far too steady for a 5-year-old. I straightened up, turned around, and faced Zhao Jin. 7 years. I was 23 when I married him, fresh out of college, having turned down an internship in San Francisco because he said, "Long distance won't survive." It rained on our wedding day. His family took up 3 banquet tables. My family filled barely one. My mom was too ill to make the trip. My dad had passed when I was 18, and the remaining seats were rounded out by my college roommate and a few friendly colleagues. At the wedding, Zhao Jin's mother said something I remember to this day. She said, "Xiaoning, marrying into the Zhao family is a blessing for you. From now on, serve your man well. Don't let anyone say our family married a freeloader." At the time I thought it was a joke. I laughed along with everyone else. The following 7 years proved that no one in the Zhao family had been joking. "Zhao Jin," I looked at the man I'd shared a bed with for 7 years, my voice very soft. "Do you think the same? That I'm a parasite?" His Adam's apple bobbed. His eyes rested on my face for less than a second before darting away, drifting toward the living room, toward where the 2 children had disappeared. "Xiaoning," he said, still using the pet name from the past 7 years, but the tone was different now, like a cup of overnight water, neither hot nor cold, making your stomach sour. You and I both know the issues between us. Over the years, you haven't really developed yourself. I've been the one holding up everything at home and outside. Wanching, she can help me. We share common ground. We can support each other professionally. You're still young. Take the divorce settlement. Start over. It won't be hard. Divorce settlement? I looked at the papers in Su Wanching's hand. Su Wanching flipped open the agreement and pointed with a manicured nail at one of the lines. Tiny rhinestones glittered on her nail, flashing under the warm yellow light, stabbing at my eyes. All assets under Zhao Jin's name, including this house, 2 cars, all savings, and financial products, are premarital assets or personal income of Zhao Jin and have nothing to do with you. Considering you have not worked for 7 years after marriage and made no economic contribution, Zhao Jin voluntarily pays you 200,000 renminbi as compensation. She raised her head, arching a finely penciled eyebrow. 200,000. More than generous. You couldn't save that much working outside for 7 years. 200,000. A number flashed through my mind last month. Zhao Jin had taken a client to dinner, and the bill came to 43,000. When he got home, he complained to me that the client's choice of wine wasn't high-end enough. And then I laughed. Not a hysterical, tearful laugh, but one that rose from deep in my throat, almost joyful. Because I remembered the document that had been pressing against my thigh the whole way home, the inheritance file the lawyers had spent 3 months sorting out. The hard corner of the folder was digging into my hip bone, a little painful, but mostly grounding. The most wondrous thing in the world is this: when a woman no longer has to worry about money, the people who tried to humiliate her with it become the most ridiculous clowns imaginable. What are you laughing at? Su Wanching frowned, dropping her mocking expression for one of wariness. Nothing. I stopped laughing, looked up at her, then at Zhao Jin. I just suddenly felt that today is a very well-chosen day. Zhao Jin looked bewildered. So, I slipped my hand into my pocket and touched the edge of the manila envelope. What you're saying is, this house, these 7 years, me staying home raising the kids, cooking, doing laundry, ironing over 3,000 shirts for you, accompanying you to countless social events, nearly dying on the delivery table to give you a second child, all of that, in your eyes, is worth nothing. Right? A muscle in Zhao Jin's face twitched. He had very beautiful eyes, double eyelids, long lashes, the same eyes that had mesmerized me in the beginning. Now those eyes held a complicated mix of emotions, a sliver of guilt, a sliver of reluctance, but mostly impatience. Like a passenger rushing to catch a flight, seeing a beggar's bowl extended, that tiny bit of reluctance swallowed by a much larger selfishness before it could even ferment. Xiaoning, don't make this ugly. He sighed and adjusted his tie, a gesture I knew all too well. Every time he'd lied over the past 7 years, he'd instinctively straightened his tie. You can't force feelings. And the money part isn't solely my decision. It's your mother's decision, right? I cut him off. Zhao Jin's mouth clamped shut. From the living room came the sound of my son giggling. Probably his sister had smeared cake cream on his nose. The laughter was crisp and bright, like a marble dropped into a glass, bouncing around. It formed an absurd contrast to the tense standoff at the door. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. In the cold air I could smell the star anise from the neighbor's braised ribs, mingled with Su Wanching's overwhelmingly sweet floral fruity perfume. The combination was nauseating. Fine, I said. I agree to the divorce. But I have conditions. What conditions? Su Wanching spoke before Zhao Jin could, a victorious smile already forming at the corners of her mouth. I'll draft the agreement. I pulled my phone from my pocket. The screen still showed the message from Lawyer Song. Ms. Lin, the inheritance notarization is fully complete. You can sign and take effect at any time. I flipped the phone away so they couldn't see. Give me 3 days. 3 days from now, same place, I'll give you a divorce agreement. Clean and swift. No dragging, no debts. Zhao Jin's eyes lit up, probably surprised by how readily I agreed. Su Wanching's brows knitted. She'd spent a few years in the business world, had more cunning than Zhao Jin, and instinctively sensed something off. "You're not trying to pull some trick, are you?" She narrowed her eyes and looked me up and down. A woman who's been a stay-at-home mom for 7 years, with no job, no income, for whom even 200,000 is considered more than generous. I repeated her own words back to her, one by one. "What kind of trick could I possibly pull on you?" Su Wanqing choked on her own words. Her lips moved but couldn't find a retort. She turned to look at Zhao Jin, who nodded at her with a relieved expression. That expression reminded me of his face 7 years ago when I accepted his proposal, the same exhale of relief, as if he'd just solved a bothersome problem. "Fine, 3 days it is." Zhao Jin tugged at Su Wanqing's arm. "Wanqing, let's go." Su Wanqing stuffed the divorce agreement into her designer bag. As she turned, her high heels cracked sharply against the marble floor tiles, like a gavel pronouncing judgment. At the elevator, she suddenly turned back, her gaze passing over me and landing on the 2 children in the living room. "Oh, and custody of the children goes to Zhao Jin too." She said it with a curved smile, as if adding an inconsequential subclause. "You can't even support yourself. What would you use to raise kids?" No judge would give children to a woman with no house, no car, no income. The elevator doors opened behind her, then closed. The foyer fell silent. The warm yellow light still glowed, illuminating the pair of pink slippers kicked askew by the door, my daughter's. The bunny ear on the left one had worn off, but she still refused to throw them away. I shut the door, leaned my back against it, and slowly slid down to the floor. The inheritance file in my pocket dug painfully into my thigh. I pulled it out. The edge of the manila envelope was already warm from my body heat. Inside the envelope were 3 things: an estate notarization certificate, a property registration document, and a letter with just 1 line. The handwriting was my grandmother's. The old woman who, in my childhood memories, always wore a dark blue Chinese-style jacket with her hair combed impeccably, had written this line with a trembling hand in the last 3 months of her life. "Xiao Ning. My biggest regret in this life is not being able to stop your mother from marrying the wrong man. This is your dowry and your backbone. Remember, women of the Lin family never rely on men to live." The Lin family. That surname once meant a great deal in New York's Chinese circles, a commercial empire stretching from Broadway to Wall Street, the 42-story glass tower that rose in Midtown Manhattan 30 years ago, and a string of classic investment cases written into business school textbooks. My grandfather, Lin Bowen, was among the earliest Chinese businessmen to enter American commercial real estate after the reform and opening up. When he bought that plot in Midtown, the Jewish businessmen along the entire street thought he was crazy. 30 years later, the building's value had multiplied 60-fold, and half of those who had mocked him had vanished from the circle. After my mother married my father, my grandmother never spoke of these things again. The business empire she and my grandfather had built from scratch became a sealed old photo album locked in a safe, not to be opened, not to be touched, not to be mentioned, once her daughter chose to marry an ordinary man who ran a hardware store. Before my grandfather passed, he left one instruction: the assets go to my granddaughter, not that ingrate. That ingrate referred to my father. What my father had done, my grandmother never forgave until her dying day. He cheated on my mother while she was pregnant with me. The other woman was a hairdresser in town, 10 years younger than my mother. The day my mother gave birth to me, he wasn't at the delivery room. He was washing that woman's hair at the salon. My grandmother flew back from the US and slapped him 3 times in the hospital corridor. Each slap echoed across the entire floor. My mother passed away a few years later. The doctors said the causes were complex, but my grandmother insisted my father had angered her to death. I grew up by my grandmother's side until I was 12, when her health began to decline, and she sent me back to China for school. Every birthday after that, I received a remittance slip from New York. The amount was never large, but in the memo line there was always the same line: save it. Don't let your father know. I saved all of it. Didn't spend a cent. Later, when I met Zhao Jin, I thought I'd found love, so I withdrew every bit of that money, principal and interest and used it for the down payment on this house. At the time, Zhao Jin's mother was so delighted to see both our names on the property deed that she kept praising me for being so sensible. Now, looking back, she wasn't praising me. She was praising my down payment. And now, sitting on this cold marble floor, my back against the foyer wall I had personally covered with cartoon wallpaper the year my daughter was born, I suddenly understood something. What my grandmother left me was never just money. What she left me was backbone. The kind of backbone that lets you pull an entire skyscraper out of your pocket when someone points at your nose and calls you a parasite. I got up from the floor, tucked the inheritance papers back into the envelope, and dusted off my pants, though there was no dust. Walking through the living room, I saw my daughter carefully wiping cream off her brother's face with a tissue. Her movements were clumsy but earnest. He tilted his face up obediently, like a puppy being petted. "Mommy," my daughter looked up at me, the watery film in her eyes already dry, replaced by a premature maturity. "Is that person coming back?" "Which person?" "The one in the high heels." She tossed the used tissue into the trash, head lowered. "She said our house can't hold you." "But this is our house." Something clenched my heart. I crouched down and held my daughter by the shoulders. At 5 years old, this little girl could already clearly perceive the malice from the world. She didn't even need to understand the biological definition of parasite. The woman's tone, expression, posture alone were enough to tell her that someone was bullying her mother. "Listen to Mommy." I looked into her bright dark eyes exactly like my grandmother's in her youth, slightly upturned at the corners, carrying an innate stubbornness. "Of course this is our home. But in a few days we're going to move." "Where to?" My son looked up from his cake plate, a big blob of cream still on his cheek, the corners of his mouth turned up, blissfully unaware of all the bad things in the world. "To the place where Mommy grew up." "Is it big?" my daughter asked. "Very big." I gestured with my hands. 100 times bigger than the house we live in now." 100 times bigger? My daughter's eyes lit up. She'd recently learned to count to 100 and had developed an almost religious reverence for the number. "As big as a whole building," I said. "With an elevator and a whole wall of windows where you can see very, very far." My son didn't quite grasp the concept of a whole building or a wall of windows, but he read from his sister's expression that this was a good thing, so he clapped along, smearing cream all over his hands. Smiling, I scooped him off the chair and headed to the bathroom. Passing the living room window, I saw that it was completely dark outside. Early winter nights came early. By 6:30 the sky had sunk into an unfathomable dark blue. Lights in the building across the way flickered on one by one, like some kind of silent countdown. 3 days. I turned on the bathroom heat lamp and placed my son in the tub. Warm water splashed over his little feet. He giggled, stomping the water and splashing me all over. Through the bathroom steam, the woman in the mirror looked older than 30. Fine lines already at the corners of her eyes, a small red spot on her wrist from last night's cooking oil splatter, hair carelessly pulled into a ponytail with stray strands plastered to her forehead by the humidity. A faded house dress, a loose thread at the collar I hadn't gotten around to snipping off. This was the face of 7 years as a housewife. But those eyes in the mirror, those eyes exactly like her grandmother's, slightly upturned at the corners, were glowing. A light that only emerges after being pressed down at the bottom of life for far too long, finally glimpsing the hope of turning over. 3 days later. I'll make everyone who ever looked down on me get to know the women of the Lin family all over again. The next morning, after dropping the kids at kindergarten, I drove to Heng'an Law Firm in the south of the city. Heng'an wasn't the biggest firm in town, but its reputation was the best. Lawyer Song Jixing was the liaison my grandmother had arranged before she passed. This veteran lawyer in his early 60s, with graying hair, had been legal counsel for all of my grandfather's domestic business dealings and the only person who knew the full content of my grandmother's will. His office was on the 16th floor of Heng'an Tower, windows facing the Qingshui River that cut through the city. The river was a dull gray in winter, the willow trees along its banks bare of leaves, their barren branches swaying in the wind. Lawyer Song poured me a cup of hot tea in a white porcelain cup, a few longing leaves floating on the surface, the tea a clear green. He sat in the leather chair across from me, beneath graying brows a pair of exceptionally clear eyes that commanded respect without anger. "Miss Lin, I've organized all your inheritance documents." He pulled a thick file folder from his drawer, set it on the desk, and pushed it toward me. "Your grandmother, Madame Lin Chen Xiaoying, passed away in New York 3 months ago. According to her will, filed with the Seagats Court in Manhattan, you are her sole heir." He opened the folder and spread the documents out one by one. The estate consists of 3 parts. First, a 42-story commercial office building located on Park Avenue in Midtown Manhattan, current market value approximately $800 million, with an annual rental income of about $32 million. He read out the numbers in a flat tone, as if reciting a recipe, his fingers steady on the papers. Second, the financial assets in the Lin Family Holding Fund account, net value as of the end of last quarter, $24 million. Third, a collection of artworks your grandfather Lin Bowen acquired over the years, including 6 authenticated works by Qi Baishi and a Ming Dynasty Chung Hua Dotsai piece, estimated between $3 and $5 million. He flipped to the last page and pushed it in front of me. That page bore the red seal of the New York County Seagats Court, the red stamp stark against the white paper. All told, after deducting estate taxes and various fees, your actual receivable portion is roughly $760 million US. Lawyer Song removed his reading glasses and looked at me. Converted to renminbi, approximately 5.5 billion. 5.5 billion. The number echoed like a massive reverberation, buzzing in my head for a long time. I looked down at the document in front of me. I recognized every English word on it. My English in college wasn't bad, though rusty after 7 years of not using it. But the figure $760 million read in any language can make anyone's scalp tingle. Lawyer Song, I picked up the teacup and took a sip, the bitterness of the longing rolling over my tongue and sliding down. Can these documents help me do one thing within 3 days? What thing? I need to draft a divorce agreement. I set the cup down, my voice as calm as if I were discussing what to have for lunch. The agreement needs to reflect my full asset situation. But there's one requirement. Before it's signed, the other party cannot see any specific information about the assets under my name. Only after it's signed and effective can it all be disclosed. Lawyer Song's eyebrow arched. He'd handled every kind of divorce case in his decades-long career, but from his expression, this one clearly piqued his interest. You want the other party to sign without knowing the full picture, and then he didn't finish the sentence because he'd already read the answer in my eyes. Exactly, I said. I want Zhao Jin and his secretary to swallow those 200,000 right back. Along with every insult they've thrown at me over these 7 years. Bite by bite. Swallow it all. Lawyer Song was silent for a few seconds, then pulled open a drawer, took out a black Mont-Blanc pen, and wrote a line on the white paper in front of him. He turned the paper around and pushed it toward me. The handwriting was spare and hard as iron. Divorce agreement, Party A Ms. Song Ning, Party B Mr. Zhao Jin. All newly acquired assets obtained by Party A after signing this agreement shall not be considered joint marital property, and Party B shall have no right to claim any interest therein. He put down the pen and put his reading glasses back on. This clause is perfectly solid legally. Under Chinese marriage law, any assets acquired by either party after a divorce agreement takes effect belong to individual property, completely unrelated to the former spouse. He paused, and the corner of his mouth lifted into the cold smile of a veteran lawyer. All you need is for him to sign this agreement within 3 days, then you complete your inheritance signing. Once the sequence of events is locked, he can't claim a single cent. I nodded and drank the rest of the longing tea in one go. The tea had gone cold, but the sweetness that surfaced after the bitterness was just right. One more thing. I took a USB drive from my bag and placed it on the desk. I need you to look into someone. Su Wanqing, executive secretary at Zhao Jin's company. Her background, her resume, any skeletons. That's simple. Lawyer Song took the USB drive. I'll have a full report for you in 3 days. I stood up to leave. At the door, Lawyer Song suddenly called out to me. Ms. Lin, he leaned back in his chair, hands folded on the desk, looking at me with the gaze of an elder toward a younger generation. Do you know why your grandfather insisted on leaving the estate to you and not to your cousins? I stopped at the door. Because your grandmother told him you're the only Lin family child who smiles like her. Lawyer Song took off his glasses, wiped them, and put them back on. The women of the Lin family have something in their bones, the ability to laugh when things are at their hardest. I pushed open the glass door of Hung'an Tower, and the winter sunlight came flooding in. Wind had risen over the Qingshui River, wrinkling the surface into thousands of fine golden ripples, like my grandmother's diamond chain necklace spread out under the sun. I suddenly remembered that necklace. Every time my grandmother wore it, she would say the same thing. Xiaoning, remember, a diamond has to be trampled underfoot and ground down for many, many years before it becomes a diamond. Grandma, I've remembered. Back home that afternoon, I got a call from Zhao Jin's mother, Zhou Sufan. The caller ID, mother-in-law, was something Zhao Jin had saved into my phone himself 7 years ago, on our first day as newlyweds. He had laughed and said, from now on we're family, you should call her mom. How young I was then, 23, believing that calling her mom would truly make us family. Song Ning, Zhou Sufan's voice scraped against my eardrum like sandpaper the moment the call connected. Jin says you're getting divorced. Honestly, don't be too upset. This should have happened long ago. Not that I'm blaming you, but you've been married in for 7 years, and yes, you gave our Zhao family 2 children, but look at yourself. A 30-year-old woman, no degree, no skills, no job, not even a driver's license. You still need Jin to drive you places. Tell me, how could a woman like you keep a man? I leaned against the kitchen door frame, phone to my ear with one hand, the other hand absently twisting the knob of the gas stove. On the stove, rib soup for the kids had been simmering for an hour, the marrow already released from the bones, the broth a milky white. Mom, I called, my voice so steady it even surprised me. You're right. No degree, no skills, no job, I really don't deserve your son. So, the divorce, I've already agreed. There was a beat of silence on the other end. Zhou Sufan clearly hadn't expected me to be so agreeable. In her script, I should have been wailing, pleading, clinging, refusing to let go. In every conflict over the past 7 years, I had always been the first to bow my head, not because I was wrong, but because I didn't want Zhao Jin caught in the middle. But now I no longer needed to think about Zhao Jin. At least you have some self-awareness. Zhou Sufan snorted, the contempt in her voice palpable even through the phone. What about custody of the children? Let me tell you, both of them stay with the Zhao family. You'd just be a burden if you took them. If you want to see the kids later, once a month, I won't stop you. Mom. I called her again. What? Do you know the real reason Zhao Jin wants to divorce me? I turned off the stove, the last bubble in the soup pot slowly subsiding. He's gotten together with his secretary. That woman is named Su Wanqing, 7 years younger than him, studied abroad, pretty, sweet-talking, knows how to work people. Your son, for her, is kicking out the wife who bore him 2 children. Silence again on the other end. But this silence was different. There was anger in it now, not directed at me. Zhou Sufan, for all her mean-spirited snobbery, had one fatal weakness. She hated mistresses more than anything. The reason was simple. Zhao Jin's father had also cheated when he was young. The other woman had also been a young, pretty secretary. It took Zhou Sufan 3 years to drive that woman away, during which time the entire family was turned upside down. That was an open secret in the Zhao family, and no one ever dared bring it up in front of her. Are you telling the truth? Zhou Sufan's voice sank, no longer shrill, but every word sounded forced from deep in her throat. Jin has someone on the side? Whether it's true or not, ask him yourself. I hung up. Before the call disconnected, I heard Zhou Sufan already dialing another number on the other end, probably Zhao Jin's. I set the phone on the stovetop and looked down at the milky white rib soup in the clay pot. A few goji berries floated on the surface, jarringly red, like drops of blood in water. My grandmother used to say, your in-laws' attitude toward you depends on your husband's attitude toward you. Zhao Jin's attitude toward me over these 7 years was something his whole family observed. His mother ordering me around, his younger sister making me serve tea and entertain guests at her wedding, his uncle telling me to light his cigarette at the New Year's Eve dinner. Zhao Jin saw it all and never said a word. He didn't stay silent because he didn't know it was wrong. He stayed silent because he thought that was exactly the treatment I deserved. The afternoon the divorce agreement was finalized, a cold rain fell across the south of the city. Holding an umbrella, I cut through the rain and entered the cafe Su Wanqing had designated. It was on the ground floor of a CBD office building, elegantly decorated, fake oil painting reproductions by unknown artists on the walls, lazy jazz playing in the background. Su Wanqing sat by the window, a cup of Americano in front of her, steam no longer rising. She'd clearly been waiting a while. I closed my umbrella and sat down across from her. Rainwater dripped from the umbrella tip onto the marble floor, spreading a small dark stain. "Did you bring the agreement?" Su Wanqing lifted her chin to look at me. Today, she wasn't wearing red lipstick. She'd opted for a nude gloss, which looked gentler than the other night at my doorstep. But the look in her eyes was the same, the look of someone eyeing a parasite. I pulled out the divorce agreement from my bag, the one Lawyer Song had spent 2 sleepless nights polishing, and placed it on the table, sliding it toward her. The agreement was neatly bound, the cover printed on thick cream-colored cardstock bearing the gilded logo of Hung & Law Firm. Su Wanqing flipped it open and read it from start to finish. She read quickly, her finger gliding across each page, occasionally pausing at a certain line, then continuing. When she reached the property division page, her brow furrowed. 200,000? She looked up, somewhat surprised. You really only want 200,000? Isn't that what you proposed? I picked up the glass of water on the table and took a sip. 200,000. More than generous. Su Wanqing stared at me for several seconds, as if trying to judge whether there was a trap behind those words. But she couldn't read anything from my face. 7 years as a housewife had taught me exactly how to hide all my emotions beneath a calm exterior. Facing my mother-in-law's bullying, my husband's indifference, relative sneers every single day, if I showed it every time, I'd have gone insane long ago. What about custody? She flipped to the last page. You agree the kids go to Zhao Jin? It's written clearly. Custody to the father. Mother retains visitation rights twice a month, plus an additional week of shared time for winter and summer breaks. I put my glass down and met her eyes. That's my only bottom line. Sign this, and I won't fight anything else. Su Wanqing's face finally broke into a genuine smile, the smug smile of someone who'd won a clean victory, like a chess player watching her opponent willingly forfeit. You know your place. She closed the agreement. I'll discuss with Zhao Jin. If no issues, we'll sign tomorrow. No, I said. If we're signing, we sign now. Where's Zhao Jin? He's in a meeting at the company. Get him here. I leaned back in my chair and crossed my legs. I said 3 days. Today is the 3rd day. If we don't sign today, then I won't sign. If I don't sign, we go to litigation. And if we go to litigation, your relationship, Miss Su, I assume you don't want the whole company to know about you and your married boss. Su Wanqing's face changed color. A flash of panic, the kind when someone has your jugular, flickered in her eyes before she quickly regained composure. But that split-second crack was enough to confirm one thing. Her relationship with Zhao Jin hadn't been made public in the company, which meant she still had something to fear. She pulled out her phone, stood up, and walked to the other side of the cafe, lowering her voice to make the call. I couldn't hear what she said, but from the way she kept glancing back at me, Zhao Jin was probably reluctant to come. Understandable. A man bringing his mistress to force his wife to sign divorce papers is one thing. Being forced by his wife to show up with his mistress to sign divorce papers is another. The former is called owning your actions, the latter being pathetic. But Zhao Jin still came. Within 20 minutes, the cafe door swung open, and Zhao Jin strode in, bringing a chill of cold rain with him. He wore a gray trench coat, his hair damp and plastered to his forehead from the rain, his expression grim. He glanced at me, a look mingled with embarrassment, guilt, and an impatient desire to get this over with. "Where's the agreement?" He sat down beside Su Wanqing, not bothering to take off his coat or order coffee, making it clear he didn't want to spend an extra second here. Su Wanqing pushed the agreement toward him, her finger pointing at the signature line on the last page. Zhao Jin picked up the pen on the table, flipped through the agreement, and when he reached the property division page, his movement paused for about 2 seconds. "You really only want 200,000? He looked up at me, asking the exact same question. The exact same tone, the exact same look that, from the bottom of his heart, thought I wasn't worth anything. "Is it not enough?" I tilted my head. "If not enough, feel free to add more." Zhao Jin didn't add more. He lowered his head and signed his name in the Party B signature line on the last page of the agreement. The sound of the pen tip scratching across the paper was very soft, but in the quiet cafe it was unnervingly distinct. With those strokes, 7 years of marriage, 2 children, countless days and nights between us, were all compressed into 2 scrawled Chinese characters. After signing, he put down the pen, pushed the agreement back toward me, stood up, tugged Su Wanqing's arm, and the two turned to head for the door. "Zhao Jin," I suddenly said. He stopped and looked back. These 7 years, I remained seated, one hand pressing the signed divorce agreement, the other holding the now-cold glass of water, when your mother made me kneel on the floor and wash her feet on the 2nd day of Lunar New Year. Did it ever cross your mind that you owe me more than 200,000? Zhao Jin's face stiffened. That day, of course, he remembered. It was the 1st year of our marriage. Zhou Sufan said the Zhao family had a tradition. The new daughter-in-law must kneel and wash her mother-in-law's feet on the 2nd day of the new year, or she hadn't truly entered the family. I knelt on the cold tile floor and washed her feet for half an hour. She complained the water was too cold, then too hot, and finally kicked the foot basin over, splashing water all over me. Zhao Jin sat on the sofa watching a Chinese New Year gala rerun and didn't say a single word the entire time. Those old things, his Adam's apple bobbed. No need to bring them up anymore, is there? No, there really isn't. I smiled and raised the agreement toward him. Take care, Mr. Zhao. Mr. Zhao. In 7 years of marriage, it was the first time I'd called him that. When he heard those 3 words, a crack appeared in his expression, but Su Wanqing quickly pulled him away. The two pushed open the cafe's glass door and vanished into the rain. Outside, the rain was falling harder, blurring the lights of the office building across the street into a smear of orange. I sat in the cafe, placed the signed divorce agreement back in my bag, then pulled out my phone and dialed Lawyer Song's number. "Lawyer Song, the agreement is signed," I said. "The inheritance documents can now take effect." "Already done," Lawyer Song's voice came through, tinged with restrained delight. "Ms. Lin, from a legal standpoint, you are now the owner of 2 Park Avenue, Midtown Manhattan. All 42 floors, plus 3 basement parking levels and usage rights to the rooftop helipad. Additionally, your grandfather's Lin Family Holding Fund account has been fully unfrozen. $24 million in liquid deposits, accessible at any time." I hung up the phone and walked out of the cafe. The rain had lightened a little, fine droplets weaving a gray net under the street lamps. Holding my umbrella, I walked along the sidewalk and paused in front of a real estate agency's window. The window was plastered with listings. In the most prominent spot was an ad for a villa, priced at $8 million. $8 million in today's terms, less than a year's property management fee on the building I now owned. But I had once drained every birthday remittance my grandmother had sent me over a decade to make the down payment on that house. At the time, Zhao Jin had put his arm around my shoulders and said, "What's mine is yours from now on." And I believed him. Later events proved that his money was always his money, and my money, once it reached his hands, became our money, only to be quickly divided up and devoured by his mother, his sister, his uncle in the name of various pretexts. Now, thinking back, I can't entirely blame him. Blame me. Blame me for being stupid. Stupid enough to meet a hungry wolf in the season when I mistook love for sustenance. By the time I got home, my daughter and son were already asleep. The nanny, Sister Chin, was sitting in the living room watching TV with the volume turned low. I sent her home and sat by my children's bedside for a long time. In her sleep, my daughter always kicks off her blankets. My son likes to bury his head under the pillow, like an ostrich shoving its head into the sand. I tucked my daughter's blanket back in, adjusted my son's pillow, and gently turned off the children's room light. The living room was quiet. The TV was off, only the hum of the fish tank air pump remained. The goldfish I'd raised for 3 years swayed its tail unhurriedly in the dim blue light, probably unaware that it would soon be moving to a new home 1,000 times more luxurious than this one. I sat on the sofa, opened my laptop, and began writing a list. The title of the list was Things to Do. First, immediately upon the agreement taking effect, send a notice to Zhao Jin's company informing them that his ex-wife is now his new landlord. Yes, the company where Zhao Jin worked, Jinqing International Trade Company, Limited, rented office space precisely at 2 Park Avenue in Midtown Manhattan. The entire 17th floor of that building, at an annual rent of $1.3 million, with 3 years left on the lease. This piece of information was discovered by Lawyer Song when organizing tenant records. When he called to tell me, he laughed for a full half-minute. Second, acquire Jinqing Trade's biggest domestic competitor, Haichuan International. Haichuan's scale was roughly 3 times that of Jinqing, but over the past 2 years, due to cash flow issues, they had been seeking investors everywhere. $20 million would be enough to take a controlling stake. Third, in front of Jinqing Trade's board of directors, have Zhao Jin personally deliver his work report. Fourth, find the best international school for the kids. Not one of those elite schools you can just pay your way into, but a genuine century-old institution that interviews the parents. My grandmother's alma mater would do. Fifth, buy a car without needing a loan. I finished the last item, closed the laptop, and leaned back into the sofa, closing my eyes. The fish tank air pump still hummed. Rain tapped against the window in a fine rustle. My fingers absently traced the base of my left ring finger, where a faint white band marked where my wedding ring had sat for 7 years. I had taken the ring off when I signed the agreement today and left it on the kitchen windowsill. Zhao Jin didn't notice. He probably also hadn't noticed that I hadn't worn that ring for a month. The news spread through the Zhao family just as I was filling out forms in the admissions office of the best international school in the city. The school had a long name, St. Andrew's International School, reputedly the only overseas branch of that 600-year-old Scottish institution. The admissions office was in a Victorian-style red brick building, the hallways lined with photos of past graduates, faces of diverse ethnicities in identical navy blue uniforms, smiling with radiant confidence. The director of admissions was a British woman in her 40s, wearing a gray-green cashmere cardigan, blonde hair pinned up, speaking with an immaculate Oxford accent. She flipped through the children's files, frowning occasionally, then smoothing her brow. "Miss Song," she set down the files and folded her hands on the desk, "your daughter is very gifted. Her mathematics and language abilities place her in the top 5% of her age group. We would be happy to admit her. However, there is one issue." She paused. "Our admissions interview requires both parents to be present. According to the family situation you've indicated on the form, you are divorced. We will need your ex-husband's cooperation." "I'll resolve that." I pulled out my phone from my bag and checked the time. "If all goes smoothly, he'll be here this afternoon." The British woman arched an eyebrow, a faintly amused smile appearing at the corner of her mouth. She'd been in this line of work for 20 years, had seen all kinds of parents, but probably had never encountered a single mother, freshly divorced, signing up 2 kids, saying, "I'll get my ex to cooperate," with such utter nonchalance. After leaving the admissions office, I drove my newly purchased car to Jinqing Trade's office building. The new car was a white Volvo XC90. Not some top-tier luxury vehicle, but safe enough, spacious enough, trunk big enough to fit 2 strollers plus a full set of camping gear. When the salesperson asked if I wanted financing, I said pay in full. He paused, then his attitude subtly shifted to become more enthusiastic. "This is the magic of money, it doesn't need to show off. Just flash it at the most unassuming moment, and everyone's attitude undergoes a subtle change. Jincheng Trade's office was in the tech park on the west side of the city, a 15-story glass tower whose blue curtain wall reflected cold white light under the winter sun. I parked in a visitor spot downstairs and pushed through the revolving door of the lobby. The receptionist at the front desk was a young woman named Xiao Lu, a recent college grad with a round face and dimples when she smiled. She knew me, because back when Zhao Jin worked late, I occasionally brought the kids to deliver him late-night snacks. Every time, Xiao Lu would praise how fragrant my soup was and ask what my secret recipe was. Sister Song. Xiao Lu's eyes lit up when she saw me, then dimmed again. She'd clearly also heard about Zhao Jin and Su Wanqing, and her expression carried a cautious sympathy. Director Zhao is in a meeting. I'm not here for Zhao Jin. I leaned on the edge of the reception counter and gave her a wink. I'm here to see your chairman, Mr. Chu. Xiao Lu froze. Her gaze swept me from head to toe, as if judging whether this woman in an ordinary down jacket was joking. But she saw the easy smile on my face, completely different from the tentative, careful smile I used to wear when delivering those late-night snacks, and after a moment's hesitation, she picked up the internal phone. Chairman Chu, there's a Ms. Song here to see you. She says she's the new owner of 2 Park Avenue. 2 Park Avenue. That was the address of the New York office building Jincheng Trade leased. Chu Wenba, as chairman, certainly knew what that address meant. Silence on the other end for roughly 3 seconds, then the sound of a chair being abruptly pushed back. In less than 2 minutes, Chu Wenba himself appeared in the lobby. He was a middle-aged man in his early 50s, slightly stout, balding, wearing a navy blue Chinese-style stand-collar jacket and cloth shoes. He looked less like the chairman of an international trade company and more like a retired grandpa playing chess on some street corner. But this retired grandpa had built a foreign trade agency from scratch into a business with over $1 billion in annual revenue, known in the industry for his sharp eye and flexible tactics. You're old Mr. Lin's. Chu Wenba stood before me, his hand extended halfway before pulling back, as if unsure what etiquette to use toward a woman over 20 years his junior. Granddaughter. I proactively extended my hand and shook his. My grandmother was Lin Chin Xiaoying. My grandfather was Lin Bowen. I believe Chairman Chu has heard of them. More than heard. Chu Wenba's handshake was firm and just right, neither humble nor arrogant. 30 years ago, I did a deal with old Mr. Lin. He taught me a lesson I still use today. Business isn't about who earns more, it's about who lives longer. He released my hand and sized me up, his gaze a mix of curiosity, respect, and a businessman's shrewdness. I assume Ms. Song isn't here just to catch up today? Chairman Chu is a straightforward man. I pulled a document from my bag. Then I won't beat around the bush. First matter, Jincheng Trade's New York office rents property under my name. The lease has 3 years remaining. I've reviewed the previous rental records, and there's been no increase for 5 years. At market rates, you're underpaying by at least $400,000 a year. Chu Wenba's smile froze for an instant, but quickly recovered. He took the document, flipped through 2 pages, and nodded. Second matter. I pulled out another document. I've personally invested $20 million into your competitor, Haichuan International, through Muwei Capital. My stake has reached the controlling threshold. Chairman Chu, starting next quarter, Haichuan will launch a full-scale expansion in the North American market. This time, Chu Wenba's smile didn't recover. He stared at the figures and signatures on the second document, his complexion shifting from ruddy to grave. Ms. Song, he set both documents down and took a deep breath. What exactly do you want? Nothing much. I put the documents away and gave him a bland smile. Just a small favor, Chairman Chu. What favor? The day after tomorrow at 10 in the morning, Jincheng Trade's quarterly business review meeting. I'd like to sit in. I zipped up my bag. Just sit somewhere Zhao Jin can't see me and listen to him deliver his quarterly performance report from start to finish. Chu Wenba was silent for a few seconds, then he laughed. It was the laugh of an old fox watching a young fox pull a trick, full of appreciation, full of understanding, and a touch of relief that it wasn't him she was targeting. That fool Zhao Jin. He shook his head and muttered, so low it was almost only audible to himself. Pardon? Nothing. He looked up and extended his hand. Miss Song, Jincheng Trade welcomes you. Day after tomorrow, 10 a.m., conference room. After saying goodbye to Chu Wenba, I walked out of Jincheng's building. The sun outside was perfect, the winter sky a deep, clean blue as if washed by water. Standing on the front steps, I turned and looked back at the 17th floor of this blue glass tower, where Zhao Jin's office was, the south-facing one, with a money tree in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, half of whose leaves I had kept alive by watering. A woman walked out of the Starbucks downstairs, high heels, beige trench coat, 2 cups of coffee in her hands. Su Wanqing. Probably buying coffee for Zhao Jin, just like I had done for him over the past 7 years, except I'd stopped. She saw me, paused mid-step, her expression shifting from surprise to wariness, then from wariness to a condescending smugness. Business at the company? She stopped in front of me, that signature cold smile curving her lips again. Not here to beg Zhao Jin to get back together, are you? Let me save you the trouble. The divorce papers are signed. That 200,000 you took. Miss Su, I cut her off, my gaze passing over her shoulder and landing on the blue glass curtain wall of the building. Do you know who the landlord is for your company's New York office? Su Wanqing's smile froze. I didn't wait for her answer. I turned, walked down the steps, and pressed my car key. The white Volvo's lights flashed twice in the sun with 2 crisp beeps. Su Wanqing's eyes followed my back, traced to the car, to the blue license plate. The numbers were a date I'd chosen deliberately, my grandmother's birthday. In the car, I didn't start the engine immediately. Instead, through the window, I watched Su Wanqing still standing there. The 2 cups of coffee in her hands had stopped steaming, the hem of her beige trench coat lifted by the wind, revealing the silhouette of her pencil skirt. Her lips moved as if she were asking something, but through the car window I couldn't hear. I rolled down the window and leaned out. Oh, by the way, Miss Su, I said, pass a message to Zhao Jin for me. She instinctively took a step forward. At the meeting the day after tomorrow, tell him to make sure his PowerPoint is well done. Not like how he does housework at home, sloppy and half-hearted. The window rolled up, cutting off the cold air outside and Su Wanqing's ashen face. The car pulled out of the tech park and merged onto the Ring Road Expressway. The heater hummed, and the stereo randomly shuffled to an old song. Gripping the steering wheel, I laughed softly into the music. That evening, Zhao Jin called. He must have heard from Su Wanqing about my visit to the company. His voice was a mix of irritation and unease, like a cat whose tail had been stepped on, wanting to lash out but not knowing at whom. Song Ning, what were you doing at my company? Delivering something. I sat on the sofa in my new apartment, a real estate magazine spread on my lap. The new apartment was still a mess, living room piled with boxes, only the area around the sofa tidy. The 2 children had already been put to bed by Sister Chin. My son's steady breathing drifted from the bedroom. What thing? Business documents. I flipped a page of the magazine. Don't worry. It has nothing to do with our divorce agreement. You sign the agreement yourself, you read the terms yourself, you gave the 200,000 yourself. I'm not going back on it. Silence on the line. Zhao Jin clearly didn't know how to respond. He wanted to interrogate me, but every word I said was legally sound, unimpeachable. He wanted to yell at me, but the divorce was signed. Cursing out his ex-wife would just make him look cheap. What exactly are you trying to do? He finally asked, the anger gone from his voice, replaced by confusion and a faint unease. Zhao Jin, I closed the magazine and spoke into the phone. You were married to me for 7 years. Do you know me? He didn't speak. You don't know what dishes I like. You don't know my birthday. You don't know what I majored in college. You don't know what my grandmother did. The only thing you know is that I'll iron your shirts, cook, take care of the kids, and swallow my grievances. You treated me as a component of your life. As long as it worked smoothly, you never needed to know who that component itself was. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. Outside was the skyline of the city. In the distance, Jincheng Trade's blue tower was still lit. The light spilling from that one window on the 17th floor stood out in the night. "The day after tomorrow, when you're giving your quarterly review, there'll be a surprise," I said. "At that time, you'll truly get to know me. The complete me." I hung up, switched my phone to airplane mode, and tossed it onto the sofa. The glass reflected my silhouette, house clothes, hair loose, a cup of hot tea in hand. But those eyes in the reflection burned like two flames. The day after tomorrow. Countdown begins. Jincheng Trade's quarterly business review meeting was scheduled for 10 in the morning. I arrived at 9:30. Chu Wenba sent his assistant to meet me downstairs. The assistant, surnamed Wang, was a young man in his late 20s, sharply suited, habitually bowing slightly when he spoke. He led me through the lobby and swiped us into the executive elevator. Alone with him, the mirrored walls reflected my silhouette, black tailored suit, low ponytail, 2-inch black heels, minimal makeup, only a swipe of true red lipstick. Assistant Wang's eyes flicked to me several times and quickly darted away, probably wondering what kind of person warranted the chairman personally sending someone to receive her. The elevator stopped at the 15th floor. The doors opened onto a massive floor-to-ceiling glass curtain wall, the entire open-plan office sprawling before us. Employees in the cubicles lifted their heads in unison, their gazes following me as I crossed the corridor and entered the boardroom at the far end. The boardroom was spacious, a long oval mahogany table that could seat 30. An electronic screen was mounted on the main wall, currently displaying Jincheng Trade's logo. Chu Wenba was already there, seated at the far end of the table. He nodded when he saw me and signaled Assistant Wang to escort me to the observers' seats. The observers' seats were a row of black leather chairs along the back wall, set behind the main table. I chose an inconspicuous corner, directly facing the center of the long table, Zhao Jin's seat. His nameplate was already set out, Vice General Manager Zhao Jin, printed on an acrylic stand, illuminated by the overhead spotlights. People began filing into the boardroom. First the CFO, Old Fong, then several directors from marketing, followed by the overseas operations team. Seeing an unfamiliar woman in the observer seats, they all cast questioning glances, but Chu Wenba made no introductions, so they didn't approach. The last to enter was Zhao Jin. The moment he pushed open the door, I saw Su Wanqing following behind him, carrying a laptop and a laser pointer, dressed in a sharp charcoal gray skirt suit, her hair in an updo, every inch the capable executive secretary. The instant they saw me, both of their footsteps halted simultaneously. Zhao Jin's expression went through 3 stages. Stage 1, shock, he had absolutely not expected to see me here. Stage 2, anger, he assumed I must be here to cause a scene, to humiliate him in front of all the senior executives. Stage 3, forced calm, he took a deep breath, loosened his tie, and told himself that whatever I came to do, he wouldn't let it affect him. Su Wanqing's expression was far simpler. On her carefully made-up face, I read only one thing: displeasure. The displeasure of having a page ripped out of a meticulously planned script. Zhao Jin walked to his seat and sat down. Su Wanqing arranged the laptop and laser pointer and settled in slightly behind him. From her seat, she could just see me in the corner through the gap above the long table. Our eyes met in midair. Her lips, painted in that nude pink gloss, pressed into a thin line, like a folded knife. At 10 o'clock sharp, Chu Wenba tapped the table, and the room fell silent. Today's agenda, departmental business reports in order. Chu Wenba flipped through his agenda, his voice low but carrying indisputable authority. Last will be Vice GM Zhao's report on next year's leasing situation for the New York office. Everyone, North America is our most important growth driver this year. The New York office lease renewal directly affects the entire overseas division's budget. I want everyone to walk out of this meeting with a clear picture. Zhao Jin nodded, opened the notebook in front of him, and picked up his pen. His movements were steady, his face regaining the confidence he usually wore when presenting. This was his domain, a position he'd held for 3 years, every figure at his fingertips. But I noticed his fingers trembled slightly as he opened to the first page. Departmental reports proceeded in order. Financial data, market analysis, client feedback, chart after chart flickered across the screen. The sunlight outside grew brighter, The heating in the boardroom was pumping, and someone had already started yawning. At 11:30, it was finally Zhao Jin's turn. He stood, straightened his suit jacket, and walked up to the screen. Su Wanqing pulled up his PowerPoint, the cover a photo of the New York skyline, titled, New York Office Lease Renewal Proposal. Chairman Chu, colleagues, Zhao Jin cleared his throat, his voice resonant and confident. The New York office lease has 3 years remaining. Per the company's 5-year development plan, we need to lock in renewal terms ahead of schedule. Currently, the rental rate at 2 Park Avenue is in the mid to upper range for Midtown Manhattan. Taking into account location, amenities, and branding, my recommendation is initiate lease renewal negotiations early and aim to lock in the price and term of the next lease before the current one expires. He flipped to the next page, a rent comparison chart with different colors marking data for different neighborhoods. Based on our long and positive cooperation with the landlord's family, I'm confident I can negotiate the renewal increase to within 5% with a 10-year lease lock. That way, the New York office's operational costs for the next decade are essentially stabilized. As he spoke, his tone was breezy. Good relations with the landlord family had been one of his proudest achievements over the past few years. Although his position level didn't quite reach direct landlord engagement, his team had been liaising with the landlord's management company, and the other side had always been very cordial. I sat in the corner, lightly tapping my knee with my fingers, a very small curve at the corner of my mouth. Chu Wenba leaned back in his high-backed chair, hands folded on the table, and cast an inscrutable glance my way. The old fox's eyes held a glint of waiting to watch a good show. Vice GM Zhao, Chu Wenba drawled, "What's the projected rental budget increase for this proposal?" At a 5% increase, roughly $65,000 more per year. Zhao Jin puffed his chest slightly, clearly confident in his numbers. Over 10 years, a total increase of $650,000, well within an acceptable range. And have you considered another scenario? Chu Wenba's fingers drummed rhythmically on the table. What if the landlord doesn't renew, or makes exorbitant demands, tries to extort us? Zhao Jin paused, then smiled. A confident smile. Chairman Chu, rest assured, I'm confident. Our relationship with the landlord has always been stable, and moreover, he paused, his gaze deliberately or inadvertently flicking toward where I sat. From what I understand, there have been some recent changes in the landlord family, with management transitioning. Signing during this handover period between the old and the new actually works in our favor. Oh, Chu Wenba's eyebrow rose. How much do you know about the landlord's situation? Well, Zhao Jin looked down and flipped through the materials in his hand. The landlord is the Lin family. The older generation, Mr. Lin Bowen, passed away years ago. His wife, Madame Lin Chin Xiaoying, also passed away just 3 months ago. The heir is reportedly a granddaughter of theirs, but this person has never appeared in public, has no business experience whatsoever, just an ordinary person who got married, had children, and was a stay-at-home mom for many years. Based on my understanding of that type of person. He paused, as if choosing the right word. That type of person, Chu Wenba repeated his phrasing. Continue. Based on my understanding of that type of person, Zhao Jin swallowed, not retracting his wording. Taking over an inheritance this large, she's bound to be overwhelmed and will need a stable, major client to help her keep up appearances. If we proactively go to negotiate renewal now, we're essentially offering timely help. What reason would she have to refuse? Silence in the boardroom for 2 beats. Then, a voice sounded from the corner. Vice GM Zhao's assessment is very interesting. Everyone turned toward me. I rose from the leather chair and walked, step by step, toward the long table. My heels struck the floor steadily, crisp as a metronome in the silent room. The smile on Zhao Jin's face petrified. Su Wanqing's fingers clenched the edge of the notebook on her lap. Unfortunately, there's one small problem. I reached the long table, placed both hands on the mahogany surface, and met Zhao Jin's eyes from across the entire table. That person with no business experience whatsoever, just an ordinary person who got married, had children, and was a stay-at-home mom for many years, Vice GM Zhao, Do you really know me that well? Zhao Jin's face went from ruddy to ashen. He opened his mouth, emitting a few broken syllables, but failing to form a complete sentence. You, his finger pointed at me, his lips trembling as if electrified. How are you? I am the sole granddaughter of Lin Bowen and Lin Chin Xiuying. I pulled my hands back from the table, stood straight, my voice as clear as raindrops hitting glass. My grandmother passed away in New York 3 months ago. Her will was certified by the Suigate's court in Manhattan, and I inherited the entirety of the Lin family estate, including 2 Park Avenue. Those last 3 words landed like 6 nails, each hammered into the air of the boardroom. Zhao Jin stumbled back a step, knocking over the chair behind him. The back of the chair hit the floor with a heavy thud. Every person in the boardroom stared wide-eyed, their gazes frantically swiveling between me and Zhao Jin. The CFO Old Fong's glasses slid to the tip of his nose, forgotten. The marketing director's mouths hung open, as if paused by a remote control. Chu Wenba leaned back in his chair, arms folded, a faint knowing smile on his lips, the only person in the room who had known the answer all along. Su Wanqing's face was no longer pale. It was a sickly gray-green, like frosted sheet metal on a winter windowsill. Her nude-glossed lips opened and closed, like a fish tossed onto the shore. You're not, you clearly were, her voice shook, that condescending mockery and composure shattered into pieces she couldn't even begin to reassemble. I was clearly just a stay-at-home mom with no degree, no job, no skills. I finished her sentence for her, my tone as calm as ordering her a cup of coffee. Miss Su, your understanding of me is exactly as much as my ex-husband's. Zhao Jin finally recovered enough from the shock. His breathing grew ragged, fine sweat beading on his forehead. He looked at me, then at Chu Wenba, then at all the stunned colleagues around the table, and finally his gaze settled back on my face. You knew all along. His voice was hoarse, not his own. When you signed the divorce agreement, you knew. Knew what? I tilted my head. Knew that I had just inherited $760 million? Knew that I own a 42-story office building in Manhattan? Or knew that the $200,000 you gave me as a divorce settlement isn't even enough to cover a single day's rent on my building? Zhao Jin's body swayed. Why didn't you tell me? His voice suddenly rose, tinged with the indignation of someone who felt deceived. You hid this from me and signed. This is fraud. Fraud. I laughed, pulled the divorce agreement from my bag, flipped to the last page, and held his signature up for everyone to see. Zhao Jin, you signed this agreement yourself. You proposed the divorce. Your secretary told me to pack my bags. Your secretary called me a parasite. You read every clause in this agreement. You're the one who said $200,000 was more than generous. And now you're telling me fraud. I slapped the agreement on the table, my voice low but each word distinct as carved stone. I gave you what you wanted. What you missed was what you didn't know. Being blind yourself doesn't make someone else a fraudster. The boardroom was so silent you could hear the gurgle of water in the heating pipes. Chu Wenba finally sat up from his reclined position, placed both hands on the table, and broke the silence with a matter-of-fact tone. Vice GM Zhao, he cleared his throat, since the landlord herself is present, why don't you present your lease renewal proposal directly to Ms. Song? Zhao Jin's face went from ashen to liver-colored. He stood there, like a clown stripped of all his costumes on a spotlighted stage, facing a full audience, left holding only a ridiculous baton. That baton hung in midair, nowhere to land. His mouth opened, his gaze flitting desperately around the room before landing on Su Wanqing, as if seeking rescue. But Su Wanqing looked even more pitiful than he did. Her head hung low, her shoulders trembling slightly, her fingers gripping the edge of her laptop so tightly her knuckles were white. Her high heels had inched half a step backward without her even noticing, as if trying to shrink into the corner, invisible to everyone. Of course, she wanted to vanish. The person who had stood sneering on my foyer floor and called me a parasite was now pinned right next to that parasite's inheritance under the stares of the entire company's senior management. Vice GM Zhao, Chu Wenba's voice carried unmistakable amusement. You haven't finished your report. The landlord is right here. How do you plan to negotiate the renewal? Zhao Jin's Adam's apple bobbed several rounds. His hand gripped the edge of the table, knuckles cracking. Then he took a deep breath and, with the tone of a cornered man going for broke, said, My proposal was already stated. 10-year lease, increase capped at 5%. Miss Song, what do you think? The way he forced out Miss Song looked like he'd swallowed a live fly. I pulled out the nearest chair, sat down, crossed my legs, folded my hands on my knee, and looked him up and down the way a genuine landlord sizes up a tenant. Vice GM Zhao, your proposal has two problems. I raised one finger. First, you offered a 5% rent increase. But do you know how much the average rent in Two Park Avenue's neighborhood has increased over the past 3 years? He froze. 19%, I answered my own question. Your renewal proposal is a full 14 percentage points below market rate. If you submitted this to my asset management company, they wouldn't even glance at it. I raised a second finger. Second, you said you know the landlord family well, that your relationship with the landlord is good. But you only just found out who the landlord is. So who exactly have you been negotiating renewal with? Who exactly do you have this good relationship with? Zhao Jin's lips pressed into a tight seam. Therefore, I lowered my hand and leaned back. My answer is renewal can be discussed, but not with you. I turned to face Chu Wenba at the far end of the table. Chairman Chu, regarding the New York office lease renewal, your company will need to designate someone with no conflict of interest concerning this rent to liaise with me. As for Vice GM Zhao, I turned back and glanced at Zhao Jin, the faintest curve at the corner of my mouth. I've now fully understood the content of his report today. Zhao Jin's face finally drained from liver-colored to iron gray. He spun around abruptly, snatched up his notebook and papers from the table, and strode toward the boardroom door. At the door he stopped and glanced back at Su Wanqing, the meaning in his eyes unmistakable. What are you still standing there for? Let's go. Su Wanqing scrambled to her feet, hugging the laptop, head lowered as she hurried after him. Her high heels clacked against the floor, rushed and chaotic, the polar opposite of the poised clicks she'd struck on my foyer tiles that night. The boardroom door closed behind them. Chu Wenba placed both hands on the armrests of his chair and slowly rose. He surveyed the room full of executives who still hadn't recovered their senses, then looked at me. And then he began to clap. Slowly. Once, twice, 3 times leisurely, like an old theater fan who'd just watched a brilliant performance. Miss Song, he lowered his hands, the smile spreading from his eyes to the corners of his mouth, regarding the New York office renewal. When you're free, shall we have a proper discussion? I stood, smoothed my jacket, and extended my hand to him. At your convenience. Stepping out of Jincheng Tower, the 2 p.m. sun was at its peak. A rare fine day in winter, sky a spotless blue, white clouds drifting high. I stood on the steps and took a deep breath. Cold air filled my lungs, carrying an ineffable sweetness. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was my daughter, calling from Sister Chen's phone. The little girl's milky voice came through the receiver, every word dragging a tiny tail. Mommy, when are you coming to get us? Didi spilled his yogurt everywhere. Mommy's coming right away, I said. How about today we go see your new school? Yay! Yay! My daughter cheered, then suddenly lowered her voice, mimicking an adult's tone. Mommy, are you happy today? I stood in the brilliant winter sunshine, holding the phone, the glass tower behind me reflecting the entire blue sky. Happy, I said. Especially happy. That afternoon, I took both children to St. Andrew's International School. The admissions director, the British woman, barely asked any more questions during the second interview. She simply had my daughter take a cognitive ability test and played some building blocks with my son. The moment the test results came out, her expression shifted from professional politeness to genuine delight. Miss Song, your daughter is not only admitted, she qualifies for our gifted and talented scholarship program. She pushed the test report toward me, her finger tapping on one of the data points. Her spatial reasoning ability ranks in the top 0.5% of her age group. This is an exceptionally rare gift. I looked down at the report, full of charts and figures I mostly didn't understand. But one line I could read, recommend grade acceleration. Beside me, my daughter stood on tiptoe trying to see the report. Though she couldn't read a word of English, she read from my face and the admissions directors that it was good news, so she puffed out her little chest and lifted her chin high, wearing an "I knew I was amazing" look. "Who does she take after?" I bent down and tweaked her nose. "Mommy," she answered brightly. I froze for a second, then smiled. My daughter said her smarts came from Mommy. If Zhao Jin heard that, he'd probably scoff. In his eyes, his ex-wife was just a foolish woman who didn't even finish university properly before getting married. He didn't know, he never knew, what school I attended, what I majored in, what grades I got. In 7 years, he never once asked. But it's fine. He never needs to know now. Leaving the school, I took the kids to the biggest mall in town. Not to shop, but because a new children's playground had opened on the 5th floor. My daughter had seen it in an ad and had been talking about it for a solid week. By the ball pit in the playground, I ran into someone unexpected, Josephine. She was in the children's clothing store across the way, picking out clothes. In her hand was a pink princess dress, which she held up to the light to check the stitching. Beside her stood a young woman, early 20s, with a visible baby bump of about 5 or 6 months. She had a sweet face, spoke in a coquettish, high-pitched voice, and was clinging to Josephine's arm, calling her auntie with great intimacy. Josephine bought her 2 outfits, 3 pairs of baby shoes, and an imported bottle gift set, swiping her card without batting an eye. I stood at the playground entrance, watching this scene through the glass, a sourness I couldn't tell was disgust or absurdity rising in my stomach. This child, if I wasn't mistaken, was likely Zhao Jin's younger sister Zhao Jing's. Zhao Jing had gotten married last year. Her husband was a rideshare driver with a modest background. Josephine had always been dissatisfied with this son-in-law and frequently nagged her daughter, criticizing her for marrying badly, for not managing the household well, for disgracing the Zhao family. The year before last, during Chinese New Year, when Zhao Jing miscarried her first pregnancy, Josephine's first reaction wasn't concern for her daughter's health. It was complaining, "Can't even keep a baby, so useless." And now, here she was, lavishing generosity on an outsider. I didn't go into that children's clothing store, and I didn't greet her. But that evening, back home, I opened my laptop and pulled up the investigative report Lawyer Song had sent. Su Wanqing. Su Wanqing, 26, graduate of a U.S. State University Business School whose national ranking was outside the top 200, a far cry from the top 50 in the U.S. on her resume. She'd changed jobs 4 times since returning to China, none lasting more than a year. The reason given was personal development, but Lawyer Song's appended notes showed that HR departments at 2 of those companies gave the evaluation not recommended in phone reference checks. The more interesting content came next. Su Wanqing had 3 credit cards in her name, currently with a total outstanding debt of 580,000 RMB, already over 3 months past due. The white BMW 3 Series she drove was financed, with monthly payments of 12,000. The car loan was also 2 months behind. Bank collection texts and emails flooded her phone, and Lawyer Song had found over a dozen debt records through public channels. Furthermore, Lawyer Song's investigation revealed that before joining Jincheng Trade, Su Wanqing had worked at another foreign trade company and had her last month's salary withheld for suspected leakage of trade secrets. Though it never escalated to a lawsuit, it was well documented in that company's HR files. I read the report 3 times from start to finish, then closed the laptop and leaned back in my chair. So that's how it was. No wonder she was so desperate to get to the top. No wonder she followed Zhao Jin to blockade my front door and force me to sign divorce papers. She wasn't fighting for a man at all. She was grasping for a lifeline. Her debts were about to drown her, and Zhao Jin's salary and position were the nearest buoy she could grab. So she needed to turn Zhao Jin into a single man in the shortest time possible, then legitimately marry him and have him pay off her debts. Too bad in all her calculations, she never factored in that Zhao Jin's ex-wife owned a skyscraper. I picked up my phone and sent Lawyer Song a message. Su Wanqing's debt breakdown. Put together a complete summary for me. All of it, credit card debt, car loan, consumer loans, private borrowing. I need it by tomorrow morning. Lawyer Song replied instantly, okay. Then he followed up, what are you going to do? I thought for a moment and typed 6 words, send her a little gift. The next morning, the general manager's office at Jincheng Trade received a courier package. The recipient was Su Wanqing. The sender merely read, someone who cares about you. The box wasn't large. Inside was an exquisite velvet jewelry box, dark blue with gilded English letters on the lid, looking very expensive. Several colleagues gathered around, chattering guesses. A necklace? A ring? Could it be from Vice GM Zhao? Su Wanqing's face glowed with a reserved smugness. She slowly unwrapped the package and, beneath everyone's gaze, opened that box. Inside there was no necklace, no ring, only a piece of paper. On the paper was a detailed debt schedule. Credit card debt 580,000. Car loans 6 months past due. 3 consumer loans totaling 220,000. Countless private loans, each figure printed clearly, each line annotated with the source of the debt and days overdue. At the very bottom, in bold font, if the banks initiate legal proceedings, you will face wage garnishment, placement on the list of judgment defaulters, and other legal consequences. Tucked beneath the schedule was a sticky note, with a handwritten line, Zhao Jin's monthly salary is 25,000. After mortgage and car payments, he has 8,000 left. That 580,000 credit card debt of yours, can he even afford to pay it off? Su Wanqing's face cycled through 3 colors in 5 seconds, from smug pink to the stark white of exposed lies to the ashen gray of creeping fear. She slammed the box shut, her fingers trembling so badly it took 3 tries. Who sent this? Her voice pitched into a distorted shriek, like nails on a chalkboard. The colleagues around her scattered rapidly, every face wearing the awkwardness of having accidentally glimpsed something they shouldn't have. Some lowered their heads and pretended to check their phones. Others hurriedly carried their cups to the break room. A few exchanged meaningful looks that translated roughly to, so the vice GM she's about to marry only makes 25,000 a month? Su Wanqing fled with the velvet box, sprinting toward the restroom, her high heels hammering a chaotic echo down the hallway. I received the delivered notification from Lawyer Song while I was in the new apartment drawing with my daughter. My phone buzzed. I glanced down, smiled, and set it on the table. My daughter was sprawled on the coffee table, coloring her drawing with an orange marker. The drawing was of a very tall building, with 3 people standing on the roof, 1 big, 2 small. The big one wore a red dress, the hair drawn messily, but smiling happily. Who's this? I pointed at the red-dressed figure. It's you. She didn't look up. It's your new building. And these 2. It's me and Didi. She finished the last stroke, held up the drawing to the light, looked it over left and right, and nodded approvingly. We live on the very top. And nobody can kick us out. Right. I pulled her close and rested my chin on her fuzzy head. Nobody can. That weekend at dusk, as deep blue spread across the sky outside the window, I took the 2 children to a wonton stall hidden deep in an old town alley. My grandmother used to take me there when I was little. Flagstone path, wooden signboard, a pot of rich bone broth forever bubbling on the stove. After all these years, the taste was exactly the same. My daughter sat on a plastic stool, her short legs dangling far from the ground, swinging back and forth. In front of her was a small bowl of wontons, seaweed, and tiny shrimp floating on the broth. She scooped them up one by one, puffing her cheeks to blow, making sure each one was cool enough before putting it in her mouth. My son sat in a booster seat next to me, clumsily stabbing at his wontons with a spoon, breaking the skins, the meat filling leaking into the soup, making him grunt in frustration. My phone buzzed on the table. The caller ID, Zhao Jin. I hesitated, then answered. Song Ning. His voice was nothing like the last call, no interrogation, no bravado, just a hollow, exhausted rasp. Let's talk. Talk about what? I scooped up a wonton and blew on it. Wanqing. He paused. That thing you sent her. What's the meaning of it? No meaning, I said. Just sharing some information I came across with Miss Su. Isn't she about to become Mrs. Zhao? A Mrs. Zhao should have a clear understanding of her husband's financial situation. After all his loan payments, your monthly salary leaves you 8,000. Her credit card debt is 580,000. I don't need to teach her how to do that math, do I? A heavy thud came from the other end. Maybe Zhao Jin slamming his fist on a desk, maybe him throwing something. What exactly do you want? You ruined me, and now you want to ruin her too. Ruin you. I set my spoon down, my voice still calm, but every word dipped in frost. Zhao Jin, when you and your secretary stood at my front door and made my children hear someone call their mother a parasite, did it ever cross your mind, at that moment, what you were ruining? A long silence. The only sound was his ragged breathing and the faint background noise of a TV on the other end, probably his mother watching another family drama in the living room. I'll give the 200,000 back, he finally said, his voice so low it sounded ground through his teeth. I'll add another 100,000. 300,000. Just leave Wanqing alone. I suddenly felt very tired. Not physical exhaustion, but the heart-deep weariness of having to explain the same thing over and over to someone who always gets the same question wrong. 7 years, and Zhao Jin still hadn't learned the most basic lesson. There are things in this world money can't buy. Like respect. Like dignity. Like 7 years of a woman's trampled youth. Zhao Jin, I lowered my voice so the 2 children eating wontons next to me wouldn't hear. Do you think I still need your 300,000 now? He said nothing. Listen carefully. The total value of assets under my name is 7.6 billion US dollars. In renminbi, about 55 billion. The rent for your Jincheng Trade New York office will be collected by me personally starting next quarter. Every dollar you pay me in rent is paying down what you've owed me for 7 years. I paused for a beat. Also, one more piece of news. I've secured a controlling stake in Haichuan International. Starting next month, Haichuan launches a full-scale expansion in North America. Vice GM Zhao, you'd better prepare. On the other end came the sharp clatter of a phone hitting the floor, then harsh static. I placed my phone on the table and continued eating my wontons. My daughter looked up, a small piece of seaweed stuck to the corner of her mouth, head tilted. Mommy, was that Daddy? What did he say? He said he wants to give the money back to me. Are you happy? I used a napkin to wipe the seaweed from her mouth. Mommy doesn't need his money. Mommy has her own money. How much? My daughter's eyes sparkled. She'd recently learned the word million and thought it was the biggest number in the world. I thought for a moment and gestured with my hands. As much as a whole building. My daughter tilted her head and thought for a long while before drawing her conclusion. Then Daddy must regret it a lot, right? Don't know. I picked up my bowl and drank some soup. The broth was rich, the seaweed fragrant, the tiny shrimp popping on my tongue with little bursts of saltiness. Regret or not, it has nothing to do with us anymore. 2 months later, Zhao Jin and Su Wanqing broke up. The news filtered out from Jincheng Trade. Chu Wenba personally called me, his tone carrying and I knew it all along knowingness. He said Su Wanqing had stormed into Zhao Jin's office one Friday afternoon, and less than 10 minutes later rushed out with red eyes, the sound of the door slamming echoing across the entire 17th floor. The next day, she submitted her resignation letter. The reason for the breakup, reportedly, was Su Wanqing demanding Zhao Jin pay off her credit card debt. Zhao Jin said he didn't have the money. Su Wanqing shot back, if you're so broke, why did you get divorced? Zhao Jin retorted, you were the one who told me to. Then the two tore into each other. The office turned into a coliseum, and the sweet words of the past months were ripped to shreds. Eventually, within days, Su Wanqing received lawyers' letters from 3 separate banks, formally initiating debt collection proceedings. According to informed sources, she has since left the city, gone somewhere no one can find. As for Zhao Jin, after Su Wanqing left, he also submitted his resignation to Jincheng Trade. Chu Wenba did not ask him to stay. The last I heard of the Zhao family was 3 months later. My former sister-in-law, Zhao Jing, sent me a very long WeChat message. The gist, her mom Zhou Sufan had fallen ill. Zhao Jin, after quitting, couldn't hold down a few jobs. Her brother was like a lost soul, locking himself in his room all day. Her own life at her in-laws was miserable too, and could I please For the sake of once being family, help out. I didn't reply. That same day, I signed the enrollment confirmation for St. Andrew's International School. My daughter was officially accepted into the gifted and talented program, skipping a grade into second grade. My son also received his spot in the kindergarten. Sister Chin drove the white Volvo to take the kids to school. My daughter, in her brand new navy blue uniform, carrying a backpack almost as big as her, stood at the car door and waved at me, calling out, "Bye, Mommy." Her voice crisp and bright, like a marble bouncing into the early spring sunshine. The car pulled out of the complex gates and turned onto the boulevard lined with plane trees. It was early March, the trees not yet leafed, but a faint bluish-green tinge already hovered at the branch tips. Spring was on its way. I returned to the study, turned on my computer, and on the screen popped up Lawyer Song's latest document. The title, Lin Family Holding Fund Q1 Investment Return Summary. I scrolled down a page and saw a line. As of quarter end, the fund's net asset value has grown 12%. Realized returns fully cover the annual operating costs and taxes of the New York office building, with a net surplus of approximately $4 million. I read that line 3 times over, then turned off the computer, stood up, and walked to the window. Sunlight fell on the windowsill. The potted spider plant I'd brought from the old house was putting out new tender shoots. In the old place it had wilted for years, leaves yellow and limp. Every time Zhao Jin's mother visited, she'd call it an eyesore, said it attracted bugs. After moving to the new house, I did only one thing, moved it from the north room to the south window. Once it got enough sun, it came back to life. So many things in this world, when it comes down to it, are just a matter of having enough sun. My phone screen lit up on the desk, a calendar alert popping up, tomorrow, 10 a.m., Haichuan International North America Division launch meeting. I picked up the phone, ready to return Chuanba's call. Another bank notification flashed on the screen, Jinqing Trade's New York office first quarter rent, deposited. I took a screenshot of the bank notification and saved it in my photo album. The previous photo in the album was my daughter on her first day in uniform, the little girl grinning by the car door, a missing front tooth leaving a gap that stood out in the sunlight. Behind her was the white Volvo, the white car door reflecting the early spring blue sky. I locked my phone, slipped it into my pocket, and headed for the door. From the end of the hallway came my son's giggling, probably Sister Chen folding him another paper airplane. Child, mother, ex-wife, heiress, out of all those labels, the one I like best is just Songning. No prefix, no suffix, no one else's name attached to it. Just Songning. A complete name, belonging entirely to herself.